This week, Jonathan and I debate who is the greatest documentary podcaster of all time as we discuss the 2013 documentary Trials of Muhammad Ali. Welcome to the podcast. I am PT.
And I'm Jonathan. We're glad you can join us. Assuming, are we posting these links, these cast live, or is this just between me and you, not Tyler?
Just a private conversation. Yeah. So at the moment, yeah, they're pretty much just going up on YouTube. I mean, people go watch them on YouTube, but
that's good.
They haven't worked out the website situation yet. But the good news is, man, that's what they tell you to do now. So they're like just hold a bunch of episodes and post them all at once, and then it'll bump you up in the rankings. So I'm pretty sure we'll become hugely famous once we finally get that fixed and get like 10 episodes up at once. That'll be great.
Yeah, I always thought talking about documentaries on the internet would make me famous. That was my assumption going into it.
That is the path to success. How's it going, Jonathan?
Going well. So winter's kind of upon us here in Colorado. A little snowy, a little cold, but today was beautiful, I guess. So can't complain.
Yeah, no, I had to put on a jacket today. I was messed up.
Whoa.
Like, what is going on? But it was mostly only because it was raining. It wasn't a little cold or anything.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to talk about Trials of Muhammad Ali. I feel like probably about, just to give the listeners, the theoretical listeners, if we ever get the website fixed, give the theoretical listeners a little, heads up. I feel like probably about half this is going to be talking about Creed. Half to 2/3, but so I don't know. Should we wait and talk about? I feel like we got to do a little Creed review. Should we wait and do that at the end, or should we do it now?
Let's do it now. We'll do a Creed review now because I think we'll get buried in stuff that may not interest the viewers as much on the specific documentary. So let's start it off with something totally off topic, like Creed.
Okay, so if you don't want to hear anything about Creed, I'd say jump forward about 10 minutes. If you're interested in Creed but don't want to hear my meandering discussion of my weird little life experience review of Creed, tap forward 5 minutes. I'm about to tell the story of my review of Creed. So here's my review of Creed, Jonathan.
Let's hear it.
You saw it, by the way, right? You saw Creed, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Saw
okay,
Creed.
Cool. Just making sure before I drop some bombs. No, I'm not going to spoil anything. But so at the end of I got out of Creed. I was pretty hyped. I went to my car. I was like, I need to build a playlist on Spotify that is all about. I was thinking about how a big theme in the Rocky movies is like, there's always that scene where the Rocky, or in this case Adonis, punches the other boxer, and then the other boxer's like, oh, your punch is weak, and then over the course of the fight they earn their respect. But I was thinking about that, and I was like, I need to do a playlist of songs that are like, hey, you underestimated me, but I turned out awesome. So I started doing that, and I only got as far as Forgot About Dre and Picture Me Rollin' by Tupac, and those are the only two songs I had on my list, and I was like, I should really go home and stop making a playlist in my car in the parking lot. So I started driving home, and don't worry, this is getting to my review. So I'm driving home, I get to this part. So on my drive home, I'm driving on this like kind of highway thing where there's a speed camera that makes sure you're going 45. So I drive past that every day, so I always slow down for that. But then like a mile past that, it goes up to 55. But generally, I like take that camera. When I'm past that camera, I'm like, all right, I'm good to go. And I just step on the gas and get up to my 55. So that gives me 10 miles an hour leeway, right, to 55. I was also really hyped listening to this music, which gave me probably about 5 miles an hour past that. And then I was also at this part right before it turns 55 where it's a steep hill. So that's probably like, 5 miles an hour extra on that. And then I had just seen Creed. It was super hyped, so that's like 10 miles an hour on that. So sure enough, I got pulled over right at the bottom of the hill. Like I was so close to where it turns 55 that when I pulled over off to the side, I was past that. I was in the 55 zone. But anyway, the cop comes up, and I was like, all right, my only chance here is I have to say I just saw Creed, and just hope that this guy is a Rocky fan. So the cop comes up, and he's like, yeah, why are we going so fast? And I was like, oh, I just saw that new Rocky movie, Creed, and I'm sorry, I was just so hyped from it. He's like, oh yeah, is it good? And I was like, yeah. He was like, all right, well, give me your information. And then he left, and then came back a minute later, and he was like, well, it's the holiday weekend. because it was the day before Thanksgiving. He's like, I made a vow to myself that wasn't gonna give any tickets. And I was like, all right. He's like, but you were going really fast, so I'm gonna give you a ticket and break my vow. I was like, son of a
Oh
bitch.
man.
It's like, that was a dick move. And then he was like, and then so he's like, had me sign the ticket, like, and then he gave it to me, and he was like, oh, I got to make sure you didn't sign at Clubber Lang. And then so after he gave me the ticket, then he starts going on about Rocky and start wanting to talk about Rocky. At that point, I was not in the mood to talk to him about Rocky. I was so bad though that my Rocky ploy did not work.
Yeah, that's a ripoff, especially. And then not only that, he told you he specifically vowed to himself to not give tickets, and then he gave you a ticket.
Yeah.
How fast were you going? What did he give you the ticket for?
Let's go excessively fast, dangerously fast. I was going. Well, keep in mind though that it was about to turn 55. Like I was essentially in 55, but I was going 70. So yeah.
Ooh, 70 to 45.
Definitely a little too fast for the conditions. But like I say, this is some extenuating circumstances.
Right.
All right, Phil, just here. So that's my review of Creed. It made me speed 25 miles an hour over the limit and get a ticket for the first time in many, many years.
Nice.
Let's hear your review of Creed.
My review is not going to top that. I know that much. I really liked Creed. I was surprised that every character in it was at least a somewhat complicated character and interesting. There was nobody that was just like a couple of people came close to a two-dimensional character, but they all had a little life and a little love to them. So I thought that was cool. I thought it was like I'd just seen Southpaw, and this movie was kind of everything Southpaw should have been, where it like Southpaw just like tried to focus on like the personal elements of boxing, a specific boxer, and then like also bring you into the ring with him, and it just didn't quite hit the mark on either of those two elements. And Creed hit the mark on
with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, with Jake Gyllenhaal, he was like the one thing Southpaw had going for it was Jake Gyllenhaal is insanely ripped for that movie. They must have made him train like a crazy person.
Right.
But other than that, like Creed, yeah, just very cool, dramatic character development and storyline, and I thought they did a great job with it. And then the fights were awesome. Maybe I could have used one more fight in that movie.
Yeah. So a couple things on Creed for mine. Definitely agree with everything you said. Like I was shocked. Like I expected to like it, but I was shocked by how like well made it. Like it was definitely the best made of the Rocky franchise. Like it was just super well directed, well written. Like all that stuff was way better than it should be in a Rocky movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My going into Creed, my thought was I'm gonna say this is a horrible movie, but I really liked it. Like that's kind of the mentality that because I knew I would like it because I'm a sucker for a good boxing movie, and I assume they'd at least have some, if Rocky knows anything, they know how to make a good boxing match, and it was a lot more than that. It was a very cool film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Michael B. Jordan, actor.
Yeah, he's amazing, dude. That guy's had a fucking career. How old is he? I don't know. He's like what 30, and he was on The Wire. He was on Friday Night Lights. He was in Fruitfield Station, and he's been like had like with this, I would say he's had 4 classic things that he's been in. It's like crazy.
And also One Big Black Guy.
Right. So Stallone's gonna win an Oscar. That's my prediction. Because it was a good performance. Like I'm not saying it's necessarily an Oscar-worthy performance, but it's like that thing where it's like he
it's the
humbled
end of his
himself.
career,
It's the end of his career. Like he's still gonna win an Oscar.
I bet you. My prediction is he gets a nomination, but no win.
Yeah, fair enough. And really impressed with the female character of the movie. Like I don't remember her name, but the girlfriend or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they actually did a good job of making her, like you said, a real character, and not not the standard like, oh my god, don't go fight. Like it was nothing else going on in her life at all except for like the boyfriend.
Yeah, she was like a really good match for his character, and their relationship was complex, and she was a very strong female character. Agreed.
Yeah, good stuff. I knew right away when the very beginning scene when it was when they were in juvie and he was having that talk with Paul's wife, and he was like, yeah, I don't have a father, and she was like, yes, you do. He was like, what was his name? And then Creed comes up big on the screen. I was like, oh shit, this filmmaker knows what's going on. And I really also, last thing for me is that I really appreciated the way it leaned into like the stereotypes of the Rocky movies, like, but it like picked the right ones to really lean into. I felt like it really, it had those cliches of the Rocky movies, but it picked the right ones, and it right. Didn't shy away from them. It was like knew that it was due to cliche and was like, yeah, fuck you, I'm doing this cliche.
Right. Yeah, it was really the throwbacks to Rocky were amazingly well done in this movie. Like, you rarely see, like, because I mean, like, obviously this is it's not really a Rocky movie, or it's obviously part of the Rocky franchise, but it's like a reboot to the Rocky franchise, if you will. But it picked just the right things, just the right like throwbacks to the old Rockies, and it even like the score of the movie picked just those right moments where it would like pull the Rocky theme song into it, but only for a second, only enough to make you be like, yeah, you are watching Rocky film right here. But it was just enough that it didn't ruin it, and it didn't make it stupid, and you weren't like, oh, they're just copying their old crap. So yeah, that was that. Like, but when I got done watching the film, I was like, that was masterfully done. Throwbacks to the old Rockies.
So. Yep, totally. If you ever want to have some interesting reads, there's some really good interviews with the director of this. He was like, he has this whole story about how his dad like loved the Rocky movies, and like I think his dad was sick with cancer, and like would always watch the Rocky movies like before he'd go get chemo and stuff to psych himself up, and he just has like tons of memories of watching Rocky, and like wow. I think he died from, and the director has been trying to get this movie made for a while, and basically the big stumbling block was like convincing Stallone to do this, because Stallone's written all the other Rockies and did not write this, and like convincing him to do it, and took many years to convince him, but yeah. Good
wow,
job. You did it.
Good job. Way to be persistent. That really took many years. So.
Well done. All right, so Creed. Okay. Creed's awesome.
Yeah, should go see it.
I'm gonna buy it on DVD or Blu-ray and watch it every day when it comes out.
Dude, if you do that, you will be ripped. You'll just like
you'll
have to be. You'll just be every day. You'll just be like, you'll get done watching Creed and be like, you know what I'm gonna do? You can run a marathon. Just can.
Yeah, no problem.
No problem.
It'd be great. Yeah, I kind of want to go see it in the theater again. By the way, we were talking about like meeting up in Philly to watch it. Now I'm really sad that we didn't, because it was so good. And because it was like featured Philly so much, it would have been cool.
It would have been cool. And if it would have been any other weekend than the Thanksgiving weekend, I would have made that happen. I think we all would have. But yeah, it just it would have been too hard. We would have had to finish Thanksgiving lunch or dinner or whatever. Been like, all right, I gotta hop on a plane in the airport.
Right.
Peace out, family.
We could have just waited to see it for a weekend ago.
Yeah, I suppose we could have done that. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, actually, I'm pretty booked through the beginning of January. But if it's still in theaters towards mid-January, I'll hop on a plane and go to Philly.
You know how to see it. Yeah. All right. So segue into Muhammad Ali. So one thing that I think they did really well in Creed, which I hadn't seen in the other Rocky movies, was like clearly Apollo Creed is based on Muhammad Ali, and it's interesting to me that in Creed they really focused on like the Apollo is the greatest boxer of all time. Like they said that a couple times, or like is maybe the greatest boxer of all time, which is interesting, I thought, and definitely ties it back to the Muhammad Ali thing. So that's my segue back to the Trials of Muhammad Ali. Give us the synopsis, Jonathan.
All right. For those of you who are looking to see the boxing career of Muhammad Ali, the Trials of Muhammad Ali is not it. It is a in-depth look of, I guess, like what the title suggests, the trials and the plights of Muhammad Ali's life behind the scenes of boxing, though it does tie into some of the critical and key moments of his boxing career, which were a big part of his life. But it really shows, I think, a great side of Ali that someone from my generation has probably missed, because you hear so many great things about Ali, but he was much more controversial and outspoken in ways that I didn't understand, just hearing like he was the greatest boxer ever and seeing a couple of his key fights on old footage. But it really dives into what drove him, to be such a controversial public figure, and how he kind of ended up there, and what his role in American pop culture and American civil rights and that generation was outside of the boxing world. So that's kind of the Trials of Creed. or the trials, but the trials of Muhammad Ali. Either one.
We'll take it. We'll take either one. All right. So, did you like this documentary, Jonathan?
I did. I liked it because it was so. I get on a totally biased note. I guess I totally liked it. Just because I was so unaware of the life of Muhammad Ali. Like I said, like I grew up. You know, I wasn't like a huge like I like boxing. I like Muhammad Ali because everybody's like, oh, he's the greatest fighter of all time, blah blah blah. You know, I've watched Rumble in the Jungle with George Foreman. I was like, wow, what a badass, like what a crazy. And then I'd seen a couple like sound bites and clips of Muhammad Ali, but that was pretty much all I knew about the man. You know, you saw like those couple, you know, cool witty remarks he'd make in you know on camera, but I never saw or knew really about, you know, like I'd hear stuff like, yeah, he dodged the draft, blah blah, and then it was because of his religion. That was everything I knew about it. And now, you know, it was really enlightening for me personally to watch what was going on behind the scenes and how it played out in that time period in America.
Nice.
So there's a pretty long answer to yeah, I liked it.
I liked it too. I feel like it was outside of the actual content. I just feel like it was for me, it was a real like fresh drink of water in the movie. Like I feel like I don't know. I was thinking about this. Like, are we living in like a strange Renaissance era of documentaries? Like, because like Netflix existing is like, how is that affecting how many documentaries are made? I would assume it's making a lot more be made because there's an outlet for them. Where did you see documentaries before that? Not very many places. But I was thinking about like how many of the documentaries we watched appear to be just like people who are like just fresh out of film school or people in their 20s who are like, yeah, I'm going to make a documentary about, you know, about living on $1 a day, or I'm going to make a documentary about, you know, pretending to start this religion or whatever the case may be. And like I felt like this documentary was like it's like a throwback, man. It was like, we're just going to document and tell you what happened, and we don't have any like agenda or anything. We're just going to like tell you a straightforward story of what happened in this time in history. I felt like that was a good breath of fresh air for me.
Sure, and I think like I think documentary filmmaking changed in the era of reality TV, where we now have a hybrid of documentaries, like you said, where it's really almost like a reality TV, where yeah, somebody has an agenda. A lot of times the filmmakers themselves are part of the story, and there aren't a lot of just true documentaries, true just saying like, here I am, the watcher of this event is occurring or has occurred, and here it is. You know, I mean, I think that's really what a documentary is.
Yeah.
But now it's more. You're right. It's way more common to have the hybrid where it's more of an interactive piece.
Totally, I think it'd be a fun like experiment. Maybe in like year 2 of this podcast, where just like let's just try to get a documentary on Netflix and see what the process is. Like, just come up with something. Ooh. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be good. We could just quick and see like what's the process to get a documentary on Netflix, and can we do it? Sometimes I feel like Netflix is almost like taunting me. Like I feel like every time I feel like, ooh, you know what, we've kind of like mined all the good documentaries from Netflix. The next time I go on Netflix after that, there's like 14 new documentaries. Dude,
well, this one thing that I think we'll see more and more documentaries appearing on Netflix and possibly in other locations too. Like maybe even actually, you know, a widescreen release, you know, theatrical release of some documentaries, because more and more people, I think, realize that documentaries are amazing. Like if you watched 10 random documentaries and 10 random movies on Netflix, I think the odds are way better that you would see, you know, 8 good documentaries and probably 8 crappy movies.
Right.
You know, there are just so many more documentaries that are really interesting and good, make you think. And you don't have to be like you don't have to be an intellectual at all to watch almost any of them. You know, they lay it out there in layman's terms. Anyone can enjoy them. And it's, you know, a lot of times just is as uplifting, or can be as uplifting or as depressing as a great movie.
Right. And I think we've shown that even the kind of crappy documentaries are interesting in that they can provoke a lot of discussion and stuff like that. A lot of thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Muhammad Ali. So my history with Muhammad Ali is weird because I had like my dad was a really big fan of Muhammad Ali, but again, you got to cast your memory back to when we were kids. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have clips of this stuff. So all my interpretation of Muhammad Ali comes through these weird stories that my dad would tell me, and he was like very selective in his stories that he would tell me. Like he was a big fan of like the weigh-in press conference or whatever, the pre-fight press conference. He told me all kinds of crazy stories about like, the way that Muhammad Ali would basically humiliate his opponents and just like making them look super like idiots or whatever, the weigh-in press conferences and all that kind of stuff. And then he would also tell stories about how like he like totally kept it secret that he was a big fan of Muhammad Ali, because he would go to like the bars in his hometown in Springfield, Illinois, and like whenever Muhammad Ali would come on the TV, everyone would just be like that effing, N-word and stuff. Like everyone would just be super pissed off like at the mere sight of him and all that stuff, and like he couldn't like vocally say that he thought Muhammad Ali was cool, because it was like everyone just hated him or whatever.
Right.
So that's basically what I knew of Muhammad Ali going into this.
Right. I didn't realize how, like the whole Nation of Islam thing or whatever. Because I mean, like, there's even like an interview in this documentary where they play an old interview, and the guy interviewing him is like, whatever, the leader of the National Church of Islam or whatever it was that he was a member of, was like, yeah, that guy said straight out that all white people are white devils.
Right.
And they're like, do you agree with that statement? He's like, well, I'm a believer in the faith, and I believe in everything that leader says. And the guy was like, what? And he's like, yeah, what, you think I'm gonna back down because you come on film? He's like, no, I said I believe that. That's what I believe. I was like, whoa, I can see where if you're a white guy, you'd be like, kind of like, hey, screw that guy. I'm not a white devil. I mean,
Right.
Don't be a dick about it. I'm all about equal rights, but you don't need to call me a white devil. That sounds terrible.
Along those lines, I was kind of like shocked at how, and I don't know if this was like, I wish I knew more, because I don't know if it was because he was black or this was just the interview style of the day. But I was surprised by how like like in some of those really early interviews, even before he was saying stuff like that, man, the guys were, the interviewers were like up in his face, man. You don't really see interviews like that these days. Seems like most interviews now are like, trying to be buddies with the guy. But man, some of those interviewers were really just taking him head on.
Yeah, but I bet you, and again, this is just theoretical because I don't know, maybe you're right, maybe that's how they interviewed back in the day, but I bet a lot of it had to do with him as a person, because
Right.
like most interviewees, they wait for the interviewer's questions and respond to it in a professional kind of a manner where they let the interviewer control, and they'd be like, the interviewers were trying to ask a question, you'd be like just interrupting them, just talking about whatever he wanted to talk about. He totally took control. I'm sure that pissed them off. Right. And they're like, hey, this is my job, this is my TV show, and no, he didn't.
And I'll bet it did have something to do with that he was black, because I think a lot of the, like, if you think of like your Jackie Robinsons, like their whole philosophy was like, be super polite, don't like rise to any bait or whatever, just be super professional at all times, kind of a thing, and be more professional than any white athlete would have to be. And Ali definitely took it the other direction.
Right. And again, I guess that part of this too was again, and it was really interesting because you had like the Martin Luther King philosophy, which was like, hey, everyone's equal, no one's superior to anyone else. That's what we all need to realize, and I'm just going to help everybody realize that. They know that I'm just going to say it. I'm going to do it in a non-violent manner. I'm going to get some brilliant, smart white people and put them together with some brilliant, smart black people, and realize, hey, we're all just people. Eventually, we're going to get there. And then you had like the Malcolm X, not Islamic. It was like definitely like a spin-off of like, and they kind of touch on that in the documentary, that this was not necessarily like the Islamic faith. It was like the black Islamic faith, just basically a religion saying, screw it, we're not Christians because we have our own thing.
Right.
But anyway, and that religion was basically like, and not just the religion, but the movement was essentially like, you guys go over there, we're going to go over here. We don't need you. We're just as good or better than you guys. So screw off.
So not to get into too like heavy of a topic, but I think that like we were definitely educated to really uphold the Martin Luther King, like that he's the hero we worship. At the same time, though, we live in a nation where we overthrew the government that we were under because of like taxes and stuff like that, for like way less reasons than the and we look at our founding fathers as like, oh my God, amazing heroes or whatever. Whereas like obviously at that time in history, the black people in our nation were way more oppressed than I would say than the American colonies were during the time of the Revolutionary War. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't even think we can get that deep into it because you're right. Like, the history is filled with all kinds of ridiculous crap like that, and like, yeah, I get it, but then like you also get the weird philosophy. Like, I mean, like, yeah, certainly, like, especially during the 60s when the civil rights movement were going on. Like, yeah, there was a huge oppression, and we did not have equal rights, and there was obviously tons of social injustice going on at the time. But then you had like Cassius Clay was like, screw that, that's my slave name. And I was like,
Right.
I'm like, I was being, treated as a slave and like all this stuff and his white masters and all that. And it was like, whoa, I mean, yeah, yeah, slavery was a horrible thing, but it did end, and it's substantially long before that. And to say like, no white master gave you that name. That was your parents, Christian name that they named you in a free society, and they could have called you anything they wanted to call you, just like anybody else gets their name. So, I think like, I don't know. I mean, like, I think that side was too far as well away as well. But I mean, like, I get what you're saying. Like, people have revolted against governments for lesser things than crappy inequality. But obviously, I think in hindsight, the Martin Luther King thing was the way to go. So I mean, like, every day we get closer to that equality. And if we would have gone the other way, where we had these like, North and South Korea kind of thing going on in the United States, I would think that would be working much poorer. We could be having like civil wars and all kinds of craziness, and like, it just sounds like it would have ended up like terribly. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I get the whole slave name thing and all that stuff, but yeah, I mean, it definitely did seem like he was to a certain extent kind of like being used by the by the movement. You know what I mean? They definitely got into his head, and at least that's what the documentary seemed to be pointing towards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the documentary is pointing towards that. I mean, it kind of showed both sides, because it had people saying like, yeah, he was just, because it had representatives of both sides. So I mean, like,
Right.
I think that's only your interpretation that the documentary pointed that way. The documentary is laid out like, here are the people that were like, yeah, he was just a super, he was fighting, he was doing everything awesome, and he was part of the church, and he was a good member, and because there was tons of people saying that.
Right.
And then like the other people were like, yeah, those people really got into his head, and then you saw the stuff he said, which by our standards today, if somebody came out and said the stuff he was saying, you'd be like, whoa, you can't say that. You can't, that's not right. You certainly couldn't say that as a public persona and not have huge public backlash on it.
I would love, by the way, I would love to see a Muhammad Ali type figure like today, just because like I follow basketball pretty closely, and like I follow a lot of basketball blogs, and man, every time any basketball player says something like controversial, I would say like 10 of the top basketball blogs that I follow, like the next day have like a huge think piece on like, what does this mean? And they'll have the different spins on like, it's a huge thing. They're saying stuff that's like, not that big a deal at all. I would love to see how like modern media and social media and stuff like that would react to a Muhammad Ali today. And like, despite the fact that like everything is said, like you said, yeah, to our modern sensibilities is pretty ridiculous. I think that like people like him are kind of a good force in society. It's like, it's good to have disruptive people like that.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think you're right on that front. But I mean, the problem is you need something really, like, we were at an extremely volatile and passionate time in our nation's history when Muhammad Ali was a public persona. I mean, like, now, what would somebody, what would they come up against? Twitter? I mean, maybe terrorism or something like that, and maybe like economic injustice. But those aren't things that athletes are generally going to touch on. And there's such like insanely complicated issues that, yeah, I mean, you can't. There's no like bullet points. Like, you can't just be like, there's white devils out there. You can't be like,
right. Well, the closest I've seen to it in like the last few years is when boy, surely can't remember the guy's name. The guy got choked by the police in New York City. And there's that whole I can't breathe thing. Like there was a day when every NBA team for their warm-ups wore like t-shirts that said I can't breathe in their warm-up, and that was definitely a big stir. But I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously still injustice that happens and people can get fired up about it. But I mean, I see what you're saying too. That there's not, it's
Totally. I
not
mean,
the
like,
same the
right?
same
It's
level.
not the same. Like, I mean, like even now, it's like police brutality is a hot button. But I mean, like, that you can't compare police brutality to the civil rights, movement of the '60s, where
Right.
cities would burn because people were, protesting and enraged, and the whole city, like on top of that, then had you know, a, a hugely unpopular and somewhat, certainly controversial, if not unjustified, war, and like, there was kind of like a boiling point in the whole nation. And like now, I mean, like, yeah, we still have our stuff to be freaked out about, but like, and police brutality being one of them. But it only pertains to the police force essentially, for one thing, and like, and even then, it's not the whole police force. So you're really talking about small niches. It doesn't affect. I mean, it does affect the whole nation, but not in a way that 50% of the population is on one side, 50% is on the other, or that
Right.
like everyone knows someone that's been killed by the police. You know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
essentially the Vietnam War. Like you know, everyone that grew up during that time period and lived in a small town in that time period knew somebody's child that was killed in that war. No people don't know. I don't know anyone that was killed by police,
Right.
and most people don't.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Um, so let's pretend that this never happened. Let's say, trying to think of like who the big, I guess let's say like LeBron James, probably one of the biggest athletes of the day. Let's say the same thing happens and LeBron James is drafted, and he. Do you think the outcry would be more or less today than it was then if he was set him up?
well, it's certainly less at the moment. I mean, like if yeah, I think a lot less, especially if it was like to whatever the Afghanistan war, which now like over whatever, but like say that was still going on and there
Right.
was a draft in the state and LeBron James got drafted. One, I think the odds of LeBron James or someone of that caliber and popularity being drafted are zero, because the military wouldn't want that.
Right.
But if they did for whatever reason draft him, I'm sure he would get out of it, and I'm sure it would be still a backlash. I think there's tons of people that would still be like, whatever, we don't care who you are, you got to go fight for your nation. But I think overall people would get like, oh yeah, there's a different standard for the ultra elite.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. This movie didn't really get into it, but there had to have been some. I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy, but there had to be some like some foul play involved in him being drafted, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt about it. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy either, but yeah, like especially when you can say like your dad had to hide his like for Muhammad Ali because he lived in Springfield, Illinois. Well, I guarantee the guys running the military had a pretty hefty disdain for Muhammad Ali, because they were all super ultra right wing white guys
You're right.
that didn't like stuff like the Church of Islam that was talking about overthrowing the United States and dividing it into the black and white. So yeah, that seems pretty coincidental that he was
Nice.
yeah, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I can only believe so much coincidence.
Oh, I think it's kind of interesting too the way that I liked at the end of the movie how they showed like basically the way his religious views like kind of mellowed over time. So it's like just like I think that's just obviously the life cycle of like somebody getting involved in religion who first gets involved with it and is like super gung ho, and like just mellows over time a little bit. So I thought that was interesting the way they showed his later views a little more a little more peace loving later on.
Yeah, and I think that's it's very typical because that's the standard pattern of people, being involved in religions, specifically because when you get involved and dive into a religion so deeply, you're almost always very young,
Right.
and very inexperienced. And that's when, like, I mean, like, and I'm sure everyone else can remember a time when they were like in their early teens, and like, I was so confident, like, in everything that I believed in, to a fault, where it was like, I was so sure that I was correct in my thinking, that, this is how things were. And that was like, and the older you grow, I mean, you just inevitably get more wisdom. You
Mhm.
experience more things, and you all of a sudden find yourself on a different side of a coin or point of view than you were before, that you were so sure of. And like later on through your experiences, you're like, oh, well, I don't believe that anymore. I believe something different. And that's really what mellows you out. Like after a while, you're like, oh, even now, like today, I still, of course, I mean, obviously everyone really believes what they believe. I mean, that's just how
Right.
it works. But at the same time, I don't believe anything as passionately or as wholeheartedly as I did when I was young, because I understand that I'm still learning and I still have a lot to learn and wisdom to gain. So even the things that I feel like I'm correct in now, I might not be. I mean, I might, 10 years from now be wiser and older and like be like, oh, well, I hadn't seen all these different world events and perspectives, and lived through these experiences. I understand where I was incorrect at this moment. But I
Right.
couldn't see that when I was 20. And same like Muhammad Ali, couldn't see it either. It's just like, oh, yeah, you know, there's tons of social inequality, and I'm totally getting crapped on, and we were slaves and now we're not. And this guy up here is telling me this is why. And then like Christianity was putting me down, and this is a new faith that unshackles all these bullshit, burdens and restraints that society has put on me. Yeah, that sounds right. I'm in. I'm in it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
then, eh,
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the cliche that young people are super think they're right about everything, but it's definitely definitely true.
that's
I'm
totally
definitely more
true.
mellow about stuff, and yeah, more
Yeah.
open to like, hey, it might not be right about everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, like even, yeah, especially like when you have like, when we grew up in a very small rural town that had, very limited social exposure, and like homosexuality was really frowned upon, like
Right.
growing up. Like I remember that in school, where a teacher in my high school basically like had to resign because it came out that he was a homosexual. And like, I remember like the horrific things people said about him,
Right.
and I was like, oh yeah, that guy should totally resign because he was a homosexual, and that's totally horrible. And at the time I believed that because that's what everyone around me believed. And now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I feel horrible for it. Like, at least
Right.
I didn't like take part in it, only because I was too young, and I was just too dumb, and just too, I just believed what everyone else around me had said. And of course now I think that's a horrific point of view, and a horrible thing that happened to that person, because he was an amazing teacher. But I was so certain of myself back then that
Right.
homosexuality was wrong, and now I'm like, oh my God, of course I support gay rights, because
Do you think like the whole like I'm hard pressed to find like a issue that like, and obviously a limited experience, but an issue that like has changed so rapidly. It seems like, and maybe it's just because we did grow up in that small town environment. Maybe everyone wasn't like us, but as closed minded as us. But like I really feel like in our lifetime, holy cow, like that's
yeah,
really that we really opened the eyes. Like I feel like that's like a much more dramatic shift than like even like civil rights. I don't think the vast majority of white people are like black people suck or it's terrible to be black, but like it is more micro shifts in perspective over time. Whereas like I feel like views on gay rights is like changed super dramatically.
it has. And I think, I think much quicker than the average social injustice. Uh, as long as you count that time starting, from like in our generation or whatever. Because yeah, you're right. It
Mhm.
was really bad like when we were young, and now it's essentially really good. I mean, like, not great. I mean, obviously there's still
Right.
ground to be made up, but I have faith that. So my son is 8 years old, And I have a pretty good feeling that when he is about 18 or 20 and really starts to become more aware of the world, and somebody tells him like, yeah, when you were born, homosexuals were super discriminated against and not allowed to marry, he would be like, I have a feeling he's going to be like, what are you talking about?
All right.
Like, that doesn't even make sense, and it's just going to be foreign to him. And I think that's a great thing. But yeah, you're right. I think it's that fast that we went from, but I think a huge part of it is because people are just have such better access to information now, more so than they ever have throughout any point in time. Obviously, due to the internet being the big one, where we can interact with people from different parts of the country and world, and then actually just like think how freaking hard it was to do research when we were young.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, just to find out a stupid fact, you had to literally get an encyclopedia, go find the right edition, and then pray to God that it was a fact that's old and not relevant, because otherwise you couldn't look it up. It had to be in the next year's edition. And now it's, you can really do research on anything very easily. And then you can talk to other people about it too. I mean, these are all things that are new to society. So I think that's why we flipped the, I think it has a lot of implications. I think also, like, due to that ease and access of information too, I think like I think religion had a huge part in stigmatizing homosexuality. And I know, like, there's much, essentially religion's on a quick decline of at least in America, and probably in most parts of the world, where people are much less, they don't follow religions as blindly. And then there's obviously a lot less people that adhere to any specific religion than there were, 30 years ago. I think that's a big part of it, where people can really just like, we don't look to a certain leader to tell us what's right and wrong. People are much more likely to do some research and make that decision on their own. I think when people do that, they're much more likely to.
Well, yeah, I would say the flip side of that, and what scares me about the modern era, and like this is really something that like scares me about, like, man, I don't want to sound like a total old person, but this is totally something that scares me about like the upcoming like political elections and things like that, is that it's super easy to, with the fact that there's the internet and you can talk to so many different people, it's totally easy to only talk to people that completely agree with you on matters. Like, I have a few Facebook friends who are super strong anti-vaccine people, and they are like I could tell when I talk to them, they're just like, oh my God, it's ridiculous that you are not anti-vaccinations, because they get every piece of the news they get is from a website that has that slant to it. It's totally possible to take whatever the weird little niches and like just filter everything in the world through that these weird little sites. And and it's totally like, there's so many just weird, like so many people that I talk to on Facebook and stuff like that are like constantly posting links to like just these ultra extreme one way or the other political sites, and I just know that they get all their information and news through that weird little filter. And I think that's different than it's ever been before, or more extreme than it's ever been before. And
Agreed.
a little bit.
I think that's a really good point, that is the dark side of that coin, is that if you want to, and like, it may be that's, like, obviously we have some weird new social things like mass shootings, things like that didn't really exist before.
Right.
And maybe it's, partially because of that someone can, like, because you're right, if somebody was like, yeah, I read that like vaccines really suck in this news article, that was it. Right. You'd be like, well, that 2 years later, you'd be like, yeah, I vaguely remember that news article that pissed me off about vaccines, but whatever. But yeah, you're right. Now every single day you can go, and like that same author that has one little thing that he adheres to, you can go read from his site every day and get more and more obsessed with it every day.
Right. Another good example is the 9/11 truthers that believe it was like a government job or whatever. Like, I listened to the I know I've talked about this podcast before, but the Oh No, Ross and Carrie, where they like just go and like basically infiltrate weird cults and stuff like that. They did a segment on like 9/11 truthers. they like spent like a couple months like basically in this group of 9/11 truthers, and they're like, yeah, if you like just took information from 9/11 truthers, and there's enough websites and stuff that you could like, it's really convincing stuff. They make really convincing arguments until you like look at the critiques of it, and you're like, yeah, this is ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's worrisome because like I knew a guy that wasn't like crazy about it, but he thought 9/11 was a conspiracy or whatever, 9/11 truther, but it was only because he had watched Loose Change, the first kind of
Right.
9/11 conspiracy theory documentary. Like, man, I'll tell you one thing that I wish like all conspiracy, like, we need to do, we need to make a movie about like, how they have like all kinds of movies, like virtually any spy movie has any think of any movie with a secret base in it.
Okay.
Like G.I. Joe has like the Antarctic, super crazy, elaborate, under the ice, secret base. Substitute any movie. There's tons of them that have like crazy government bases. We should make a movie all about the contractors that build that base. Like nothing else, nothing about the agency or anything like that. And just to point out that like to make any of these conspiracy theories happen, you would literally have to hire hundreds of thousands of people and spend billions of dollars that can't be covered up. I mean, like that would literally be like saying like 100,000 construction workers would not go home at night and tell their wife like, yeah, so we were building this giant Antarctic base last night. I mean, like think of that. If and for people that are big in conspiracy theories and like think that like the government is like hyper competent covering shit up, I'm gonna give an example. So let's take the president, who's the most hyper competent, gets all the power and can just kill people or whatever if you're a big conspiracy theory guy. There's a president, you might have heard of him, his name is Bill Clinton. And there's this conspiracy involving Bill Clinton and this chick, Monica Lewinsky, who gave him a blowjob under his desk. So we have two people, this many people, in this conspiracy theory involving the most powerful man in the world who can stop all conspiracies. And guess what? That was one too many people. So if you've got a conspiracy that takes 100,000 people or so, I guarantee it is not a secret. It can't be done. So there's my big debunk for most all conspiracies.
I like it. All right, so let's wrap this up with one. Let me ask you one more question, Jonathan. If let's say that a war started that you were neutral about, okay, you don't like. You're like, all right, it's not like an evil war, but it's not like a necessary war either. I don't have an example, but it's just a war you're like kind of like, all right, I guess it's fine. But you're drafted. Do you go?
Like me now at this point in my life?
Yeah, you right now. You've been drafted.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely
they
not.
decide that
I'm
up
out.
to 40 drafted.
No, nope. I wouldn't go. I mean, like I legitimately, like, truthfully, don't believe in taking other people's lives in like just a random war style environment where I'm just like, oh, there's some other dude from some other country that's a dad with 2 kids that is fighting to protect his country just like I'm fighting to protect mine. So I'm gonna put a bullet in his head because of a insanely complicated series of events that have happened on a global scale. I can't back it up. I mean, even if it was a war I believed in, and I mean, like if somebody was like coming onto U.S. soil and like trying to take over our country, I would.
That's the difference.
Yeah, I would jump in. I'd defend the country and I'd take a bullet for the team and all that stuff. But if I'm going onto someone else's sovereign territory and killing again, it's not even like I'd be, maybe if I was a super duper special ops sniper and they were like, go kill Saddam Hussein, I'd be like, all right, I'm in. I'll go take up my sniper spot or do whatever I got to do to take this guy out because it's probably gonna save millions of lives in the long run and like help a lot of people. But just to kill like again soldiers that are the exact same as me, no, I couldn't do it. I don't think. Nice. I would have huge moral issues with that. Right. You?
Yeah, I agree. Plus, like all that aside, I totally agree with everything you said. But I've been playing Star Wars Battlefront last few days, And am I not great at it? I'll tell you. Like I came to realize that there's this whole generation of kids that grew up playing like first person shooters, like Call of Duty games online. I've never played a game like that, and man, I'm getting, getting killed a lot. But like I'm slowly getting better at it. But then I was thinking, man, in real war, I would not have the chance to slowly get better at it. Pretty much got you know, one chance of that. So yeah, aside
Right.
from all the moral issues, I feel like
Right. There's that too.
my
Yeah. If you
learning
ever
curve is
watched
too slow.
a good, I guess, kind of real life example of the learning curve of war, if you ever watched Band of Brothers,
Mhm.
I don't know. Have you ever watched that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like essentially, the crew that the several the people that make it through the first couple battles tend to make it through the next, and so on and so forth. But there's a constant stream of new people that
Right.
didn't get the learning curve. Um, not to say that like an older warrior is going to live, but or or soldier or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, it's pretty
Right.
brutal. Again, like yeah, and then just like the insanity of it, like just the insanity of it. Like even at the end of that war, which fucking just like a horrific long war, and just all kinds of atrocities. Even at the end of that, the guys were like, they met up with the German soldiers with complete respect, because
Right.
by the end they realized like, oh, I mean, essentially, I'm just killing another guy who's just like me.
Right.
Yeah, that was really dumb. I mean, that was kind of the on the individual soldiers. Once you all of a sudden like get past the like, yeah, my country is awesome and their country sucks, and we're just gonna blindly follow our stupid leaders and kill each other. And like, if by the end of it, you're like, oh, that was stupid. I really respect these people.
Yeah. When you think about it, like, hey, we're all just people, and this one person is telling me to go potentially die and also go kill some other people. Like, why don't I just say no and not not do that thing?
Right. Yeah. Don't do that. Don't do that. Anyone out there listening, when someone tells you to go kill someone else, don't do that. That's just terrible advice.
Right.
Right.
All right. How many stars are you gonna give this bad boy, Jonathan?
Um, in honor of it being possibly the least we've actually talked about the documentary during our review, I'm gonna give it 4 stars.
Yeah, I was thinking 4 stars as well. I'm gonna go 4 stars. I really respected the hell out of this documentary for its old school attitude. It's got a much like. By the way, boxing. There's been like I would say 4 times in my life that I was like, I really want to get into like not fighting myself boxing, but I'd like to get into watching boxing. I like watching other sports. I should like watching boxing. Boxing sucks to watch, dude. It's not exciting. It's not an exciting sport in real life. It's like
No,
great movies, but boy,
right.
when you watch a real boxing match, it sucks.
What you can get into? What's exciting in real life? UFC.
Nah, I don't
Totally
know.
different. Have you ever watched like a championship fight night in UFC?
I have, and that's over the line to me where I like feel bad. I'm like, oh man, those guys are really freaking hurting each other. I don't like
Really,
this.
I really like. I mean, call me a barbarian or whatever, but like, especially like when you watch like the whole night's fight, like it's like watching a Rocky movie to me, where I'm just like, oh god, no, like you're just like all
Right.
into it, and like, and you totally have your like, you got to get a little into it because then you got your guys to root for and stuff like that. I guess that's probably part of the problem with boxing is you never have that team. I mean,
Right.
even if you do, especially in modern boxing or modern UFC, it's not like they're fighting once a week. You're talking
Yeah.
2 fights a year tops. So you don't have like, yeah, it's like watching football for me. I don't have a team that I root for. So when I watch a football game, I'm essentially completely neutral as to who wins. I'm
Right.
just like,
Yeah,
okay, this
maybe
game
that's my
seems kind of interesting, I guess.
yeah,
Oh,
that could
look,
very
what a team won. That was gonna happen. Okay.
yeah, that could very well be my problem. So like in the sports that I do, like I get very into like the people and like their personal stories and all that's like definitely what draws me into
Sure,
sports.
and you know what? That's why like championship fight nights are the best because two reasons. One, there's like 8 fights, so you're bound to see 2 or 3 really good fights, especially in the UFC, where they're really interesting and like, ups and downs and who's gonna win and all that stuff. But then also during all those fights, they give you the backstory of what's been going on with the championship bout, like in the actual fighters themselves, and little clips
Right.
and basically a mini documentary about who they are and what they've been through. And so by the time you're there and you're watching that championship fight, even if you didn't before that night know the fighters very well, you're like, ooh, yeah, this has a lot of they do a pretty good job building it up, and
Nice. All right. Well,
at least for me.
Maybe I'll give it another try. Cool. All right, so my recommendation for the week is the pretty popular podcast. They certainly doesn't need my support, but the Bill Simmons podcast, which is a very popular sports. He started out as like a sports blogger and got a podcast, but he did a really good interview recently with Michael B. Jordan, which made me think of this and like how he prepared for the role. But then also he had this really fascinating podcast that was about how he recently interviewed Obama for GQ. And he'd interviewed him before on this podcast, but he said like he went into that interview for GQ that wasn't like for a podcast, so it wasn't like being live broadcast or anything. It was just like him sitting in a room with Obama, and like he's interviewed tons of people. He was like, it was insane because like Obama just took such control of the conversation. He was like, I've never felt like I was in a room with someone who was just so insanely smarter than me. Like I couldn't give my like every question I asked, he would just like totally like dominate and like change it to whatever exactly he wanted to say. It was like almost impossible to like, he was like, I'm a really good talker, and I was just like so dominated by his intellect in that conversation. Like eventually at the end, what he did is he like had some quick fire questions. He was like, yeah, I'm just gonna give 2-word answers to these questions. And so eventually they kind of got control of it back. But that was interesting to me, just the way that people are able to take control of conversations. I like that. And I like his podcast, so check out the Bill Simmons podcast.
All right.
So there you go. Next week we're going to be talking about. All right, Jonathan. Speaking of conspiracy theories, I'm not positive about this, but I think this documentary might be a conspiracy theory. It is soaked in bleach.
Yeah, totally is. I at least I haven't seen it or anything, but yeah, I believe it is a conspiracy theory video or documentary. And one of the reasons. We're at the moment unofficially going to have a guest co-host.
Yes.
Who brought this documentary to our attention and said it was just crazy and was apparently moved by it. I have a feeling that I will be completely skeptical of this documentary, as I am completely skeptical of all conspiracy theories. But
right. So our friend Andy is a true believer in the theory that Courtney Love was directly involved in murdering Kurt Cobain, and he's like big into it. He often sends me links to to different articles about stuff like that. So I feel like this might be where the documentary is going, but we'll see where it goes. So we're going to be watching Soaked in Bleach and possibly have a guest host. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Cool.
Can we do that? Can we three-way podcast? Do we have that kind of technology, that kind of power?
We've got we can 4-way, 5-way, whatever you want.
Oh, wow.
We can do it all.
Let's one step at a time, buddy. One step at a time. Got to ease me into this.
All right. We will talk to you next week. Thanks for watching. This is PT. Keep it real.
This is Jonathan. We'll see you next week.
Woo!